you're not allowed to trade onion futures in the United States.
I don't think a lot of people have heard about this.
So that was probably the weirdest and strangest. Do you want control of my romantic life? My shareholders were like, that's a complete waste of time. No, we're not allowing you to do that.
Wow.
I was like, I didn't want it to be creepy. It's not a perfect system. It's I like to say it's an experiment.
This was a crazy idea you did.
But I'm not trying to create a product that's for everyone. Oh, I wanna buy a share of this weirdo. I love using enterprise products for my personal life. There's something about this idea that is a little bit dumb and a little bit interesting. That's not a solution. If I end up in jail, that's why.
Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the AI Best Business Show. The show will best learn about business, entrepreneurship, tech, startups. It's going to be a special episode. I don't think a lot of people have heard about this, but we have the first publicly traded man with us on this podcast. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about this and share it with some people.
No, the first time I heard the concept was on one of my favorite podcasts. Just to tell people a little bit of background, My First Million. I go then and I attend an event that we both attended, the 2 hour cocktail party that Nick hosts, and then I see you there. I'm like, wow, I just heard about you like 2, 3 weeks ago, and now I'm seeing you in person. And I heard about how one of your investors, and we'll talk about that, did a huge buy in your shares and all that. Uh, let's start this. I just doing a little bit research and digging deep into who's Mike. I found out that you were in the military as part of the military police, and today you're a publicly traded man. Take us through that journey. How did you go from that to the first publicly
Yeah,
traded?
they're definitely two opposite ends of the spectrum, but I do think there's a couple things that relate. So when I grew up in Alaska and my dad was a state trooper, I just growing up, I always thought like I was going to go into law enforcement, kind of follow in my dad's footsteps. And so as I graduated high school, I kind of had this plan where I was like, okay, I'll go join the army, I'll be in the military police. Then from that, I'll go to college, get a degree, and then go work for the FBI or something like that. That was kind of my approximate plan. I realized when I became military police in the army that I actually didn't like it once I started doing it. And I was like, this is not for me. I'm not a really aggressive or suspicious person. And so I never wrote a ticket. I used to get in trouble because you drive around the base and be like, they mostly stopped at that stop sign kind of thing. And so I always got in trouble. And so when I got out, I was really just at this place of like, I don't know what to do. Like this whole, all through high school. And then the couple of years I was in, it's like 7 years of thinking I was going down this one path. And then suddenly to just be dumped out of the army and be like, total reset. Now what? I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I had some friends that were just getting out of college and were renting a house. And I was like, save me a room in the house. I have some money saved up. I'll figure it out when I get there. So I landed in Portland, Oregon with like no prospects and just started to kind of, hang out with some old friends that I had from Alaska who'd moved down to Portland. And then they were all artists and musicians and writers and kind of creative weirdos. And I was like, oh, this is who I'm supposed to be hanging out with, not police officers and people in the army. And so that was kind of the start of like looking at things and how they work. And the military really taught me to love structure because there's so much, everything's really rigid. There's a manual for everything.
Right.
And that's incredibly fun. It's incredibly limiting. The fun part is like, if you know the manual better than someone else, you're actually secretly in charge because you can always just point to it. And so even when I was in the army, I was always trying to find these little hacks and these little ways to like use the system, sometimes not even to my benefit, just as a way to like flex a little bit of power or something. So I land in Portland. I end up working in a couple different tech jobs. I'm not a programmer, but I've found also that kind of like creative weirdos, I feel like, technical weirdos are also kind of people I like to spend a lot of time around. So I ended up working in tech companies. And then, yeah, the idea was basically like, how do you take this idea of, there's that idea of like businesses are people now and they have the
Right.
rights of
Mhm.
people. And so it was just kind of it's just like an inversion of that, of that
Okay.
concept. And so that's like kind of a long story on that
Okay.
first question, but it was sort of like, again, sort of military transition, that kind of structure brain into arts and culture, and then with a little dash of technology thrown on
Okay.
top.
No, and I love that. And once when I saw that, I saw the move from military versus structured discipline, going into tech, going into creatives, and having this creative mind. Uh, Just combining these three aspects give you a wider horizon of thinking. And I guess this is where the next question comes: is how did all these three aspects combine to get you to the idea of being a publicly traded person? Like, if I were to be honest, like how did the conversation come or like how did the idea come into your mind? Like were you sitting at a coffee shop and like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna be a publicly traded person, and you went in and figured it out, or like how did the conversation start to begin with?
I was definitely probably at a coffee shop because there's
Okay.
a ton of it in Portland, and I love coffee, and I love Portland coffee specifically, and it's great scene here. But it actually, like, this would have been like the late '90s, so there was a lot of kind of like cultural mischief was, around corporations. There's a lot of anti-corporate
Right.
kind of feelings, and being in Portland was like the center of it. Like there was a lot of that. And there was this company, not company, there was an arts group in Switzerland that I learned about online called eToy. Um, and eToy had this whole, you should look up the toy war, or sorry, the toy war with eToy. It's this amazing story about how, like, during the first .com wave, they battled over a domain name and all this stuff. But basically what they did, they said, well, we're going to become, instead of just an arts group, a publicly traded company in Switzerland. You could buy shares in them. But and I was like, as a fan of theirs, I bought some, but then there was no marketplace. And I was
Okay.
like, oh, well, like, if there's no market, if I can like buy in, but I can't sell, it felt like it was only halfway. And so in my mind, I was like, I wanted to be the investor that like bought shares and then had some influence and say. And then over the years, this idea was like stuck in my head of like kind of the quote unquote the right way to do it. And eventually I was like, no one's gonna do this. Like, I'm gonna have to do it. And I think I talked about it for probably like 2 or 3 years before I finally pulled it off. Because again, like, I'm not a programmer and I'm not going to get listed on like NASDAQ or the NYSE. So we had to build our own exchange, and just kind of everything from the ground up. I was like, I never went to college. I don't know how a stock market works. So I was like, well, we'll figure it out. We'll build one.
Okay. Take me through the process of building this out. Like, because it's a weird concept. Not a lot of people know about it. We know, okay, Robinhood, you go in and buy stocks like you go and buy a Tesla stock or a Facebook stock or a Meta stock. But how does it go for a publicly traded person? How does the platform look like? What are the details of it? Uh, Take us through like kind of
Yeah, so at the time, and again, this would have been like around 2013 is when I started. I had a TD Ameritrade account. This is
okay.
like before Robinhood days. Everything was slower and slightly harder, right? So what you had to do is you had to take money, deposit it into your TD Ameritrade account.
Right.
Then you could make trades. I think even at that time they were charging like $7 a trade or whatever it was. And so I was kind of replicating that system.
Okay.
Mentally, I was like, there's a model, there's a framework, let's just copy that. And so, the first thing was like, okay, you have to be able to deposit money. And so like that's easy enough. E-commerce has sort of allowed us to figure out how to move money from one person's account to the other. But then, everything else is kind of virtual. And I'd played enough kind of video games in my life to kind of understand this idea of like, in a lot of games, like a Grand Theft Auto, like you can invest in businesses and start building up
Right.
money in all these different kind of passive ways. And I was like, I wanted it to feel a little bit like a game mechanic. And so, yeah, so essentially you deposit money and then that gets reflected in your My Game account. You have a user account. The actions that you can do are pretty simple. You can buy shares or sell shares, which are listed. You put up a vote. Now, a regular stock exchange is a wildly complicated beast. And again, we reinvented that as like, I think there was three of us just actually sitting around the Ace coffee shop at the Ace Hotel at the Stumptown coffee shop, and we kept running into problems like, what happens when you click buy and then there's an error, and and then it's like, well, where did the money go? And we had to come up with all of these things of like, that I'm sure are solved problems by people that have worked in this space before, but we were approaching them new. And then the terminology of like bid and ask, buy and sell. There's a lot of specific lingo and language around trading. But essentially, we built a stock exchange that trades one single stock, and that's shares of me. And so, yeah, like initially when I started out, I was just like, how do I price myself? Like, I was like, fine, I just started, they're $1 a share. Let's see what happens. And it kind of started from there. But yeah, super basic. Oh, one thing is like, there's not even automatic order matching. Like, if you put in an offer that's that's better than the offer that's currently on the market, it won't automatically connect those two offers. You have to manually go and click each one. So we've updated it slowly over time, but it is the most basic and simple version of a stock exchange.
You priced yourself at $1. Was there a reason, or you're like, okay, I'm just gonna start there, or like that's
It,
my
it
value now? And like, how
yeah,
many shares? How many shares did you put out at the beginning?
so this is another thing where like, again, I didn't know how it really worked, right? But I kind of said, I was like, well, it's actually funny because it kind of more parallels like the start of Bitcoin or something. I just said there's a set amount of them. I said there's
Okay,
100,000 shares of me, and at the time I had a full-time job, so I was like, how do I value all of my evenings and weekends? That's kind of the time and energy that I'm representing. And I was
okay,
like, well, I can make the argument pretty safely that that's worth $100,000. So let's just start at $1 a share and see what happens,
okay,
kind of thing. And it at $1 a share, it was easy enough for people to buy a bunch that it kind of has crept up over time. And
right,
I think we're settling in at around $7 a share, which I'm pretty
okay.
happy with.
What got you up to $7 a share? Like, what do you think are the main factors that got you up to for you to become worth $7 a share?
Yeah, well, I mean, technically down to 7 because we did hit a
Okay,
peak at one point of $20 a share. I think that
wow.
was the highest. Yeah. Mostly what moves the stock price is press. And
Okay,
so, like somebody, like you hearing about it on another podcast, other people hearing about it on this podcast, if you go to the site at any time, usually the price that's listed, let's say it's $7, usually the next best price to buy is like $7.01. If you buy
okay,
one share, I go up a little bit.
okay,
So it's creating that buy demand, which, like you said, like not everyone has heard of this idea, so those that are interested are going to be like, oh, I want to buy a share of this weirdo. And it's like, yes, please come buy a share, join the community, it's pretty fun. But that will bring my share price up a little bit. Now, of
okay,
course, other people, either they need the money or they're just done with the project, which is totally fine. It's a dynamic market and they sell, and that brings the price down. So it is a dynamic pricing that changes, sometimes not all every day, but definitely changes day to day.
okay. You had this idea, you built the platform, and you issue shares out. Who did you tell at the beginning? Did you call your friends and family? Did you like do press releases? Like, who were your first who were the first investors in Mike?
So I had a pretty decent community that was really well blended online, offline in
Okay.
Portland at the time. I was doing a lot of blogging. I was involved in a lot of kind of like, I don't know, just different kind of scenes. Portland's pretty small, so a lot
Right.
of people overlap in these different ways. So it was pretty easy to kind of get the word out to the first, I don't know, like let's say 100, 150 people, because it kind of spread very easily to that first core group, which
Right.
I kind of knew
Yeah.
would participate because I was doing all kinds of weird projects with them anyway. And then like the weirdos that they knew and they talked about it, and that grew it to probably a couple hundred people. Like some people would just be like, I'll just buy a share, see what happens, and we were like, I'm gonna buy $100 worth and see what happens. And so it stayed in that kind of like hundreds of shareholders space
Okay.
for kind of a while.
Let's talk a little bit just to see the similarities. Do you have any regulations for Mike, like insider trading, these type of regulations? Have you set rules for this type of stuff?
The only rule, no. I mean, short answer is no. This is all a wild experiment, right?
Okay,
So it's like because I'm running the exchange itself,
right.
I'm also what I'm selling the shares in is me as a person. It's like I'm both the SEC and the market
Okay.
and the company and management. Like I'm too many parts of it. So I'm kind of like I've even said sometimes, half joking, I'm like, I encourage insider trading because like a prediction market, you kind of want those trades to show the true price. Like if
Right.
if you see some big shareholder of mine that knows me really well start selling a lot, like you should be like, oh, that
I,
person
I,
knows something.
I'm out.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So yes, and it's all on a small enough personal scale that there are people that have wildly more inside information than others, and I,
Okay.
I try to like post a lot and share a lot and be very open, but some people just are gonna have to know more than other people.
Okay. I buy a share on Mike. What am I getting in return? Or what's the value? What community am I participating in? What's the experiment behind it?
And it's funny that like we're only bringing this up now because like the big thing that you're buying is every one of your shares has the power to vote on my life. And
Okay.
so I put up questions to my shareholders about what I should do in all of these various ways. And my shareholders come in and let's say you have 10 shares. When you vote, it's like 10 votes for what you want me to do. So, you know, I didn't put this coming on your podcast up for a vote, but if I had, some shareholders would have been like yes, others would have been like no, don't do his podcast, or and then I would have
Right.
made my decision based on however it came out.
Okay.
So my rule is anything I would normally ask my friends advice for is a shareholder decision.
Okay.
So sometimes that's something like super boring and simple, and sometimes it's wildly like big life decisions like what job should I take, or for a while it was even who should I date.
Wow. Okay, let's dig into that. For a lot of people, the romance life or who they should date is very personal, is very like who I love. Uh, how are the dynamic of this when you're sharing it with 1,000 people that own shares in you that are getting into your life, and like how was your feeling doing that? What were like the obstacles in your head? And okay, I'm gonna put this out for vote, and like all the surrounding dynamics of it.
When I started that project, I'd been not dating anyone for a year because I
Okay.
was just like I was in a space where like I'd just gone through 2 5-year long relationships. I had a relationship that lasted 5 years, it ended. I had another relationship, it lasted the same amount of time and it ended. And I was like, in my mind, I was just thinking I need to be more kind of intentional and
Okay.
accountable about who I date and not kind of either fall into something or make sure that I'm being like a little bit more like I'm making a choice and I'm really like kind of like choosing actively this a person to be with. And I thought, well, I have this system, this kmikeym.com, where I can hold myself accountable to my shareholders, and say like this is what I want. I want to be more kind of face this head on. It immediately was like the first thing I thought was like, do my shareholders even want to have any say in this? Because this is this was pretty outside the bounds of what we normally voted on. So there's an old vote that's just like, do you want control of my romantic life? And it was like, 97% yes, they
Oh
absolutely
wow.
did. So then I was like, okay, okay, it's like they definitely do. And then I was like, okay, so how do I do it? Because like I didn't want it to be creepy. I didn't want to
Okay.
be like so what we did is we set up a separate website. Every Everyone who had shares in their account got a special password so they could log in. And I'd go on a date with someone, I'd put up a pseudonym, so not their real name, no photos, and I would just describe how the date went. And then they would vote kind of up or down.
Right.
And my friend Aaron designed the site mechanics and made it so it was secret, so I couldn't even tell how people voted
Okay.
because I wanted people to feel free to vote like their opinion and not be
Right.
like judged on those votes.
How was the what did the like I want to understand what was the psychology of that? Like how did that make you feel? And like what was your psychology? And what did that tell you about people and their love of control maybe and their love of like possessing something.
I mean, I would argue that it's not a wholly terrible system. I wouldn't say
Okay.
that everyone should go out and do it, but things like, even if you're just doing it for yourself, if you're writing up a little narrative about like how an interaction with a person went, or if you're writing up a proposal about whether or not you should do something, just that act of writing it all out and seeing it on paper, your own thoughts, is incredibly valuable.
Okay.
And then we all kind of do this thing with our friends and our community where we kind of check with people and get a reading on like, you know, like, oh, I'm thinking about making this decision. What do you think? Or I'm thinking about like, oh, what do you think about so and so? Like with, kind of thing. And then friends, obviously, when you're single, will like try to set you up and things
Right.
like that. One of the things in my mind that I was thinking about was I was like, there's a very short period of time when a friend is dating a new person when you can say something and be like, I don't know about them.
Yeah.
And like once that window is closed, you have to
That's
like, that's it. You
zip
can
it.
never say anything ever again. You're done. You have to just be like, oh, I missed my spot. So I wanted to kind of give that opportunity to be like, hey, this is the chance for someone to come in and be like,
Okay.
thumbs down, don't do it.
Okay. What other decisions did you put out for vote that the the outcome of the votes surprised you or that you didn't expect yourself to put out for vote?
So there's a couple things like, well, I used to think that I was pretty prank proof because, if it's $5 to $7 a vote, you have to get a lot of shares if you want to force me to do something kind
Right.
of thing, right? Because I control what goes up for vote. So
Right.
there's always that element that I have of control. But somebody was talking about this idea of polyphasic sleeping, and I was like, oh, that's a dumb idea. But I was like, I hadn't put a vote up for a while, so I put, should I try polyphasic sleeping? And I was a little bit surprised when they voted yes. And it turns out that my whale at the time, this guy who I've still never met, Gordon, he had always been curious about it, and so he voted it up, and it passed. And polyphasic sleeping, if you don't know, it's definitely not real, and it will make you crazy. But it's this idea that if you kind of like time your naps around the clock, you can sleep far less than 8 hours and be quote unquote fine. And it is absolutely untrue. Everyone who talks about doing it's like, I stopped doing it because of lifestyle changes. It's like, no, you stop because you slowly go crazy if you don't get enough sleep. But I tried it for like, I think it was like 2.5 months, and I would go,
Wow.
well, thankfully my work was very like, okay with me trying this. I bought like a sleep mask, and then, I'd have these naps throughout the day where I would just go and crash for like 30 minutes and then wake up, and I was so groggy and so tired all the time. I would make it like a week, and I was getting up at like 4 a.m. and just being like, well, now what do I do? And I'd be like going on walks just like through the streets of Portland at 4 a.m., being like, I can't go back to sleep and for another and eventually I would just crash and sleep for like 10 hours and be like, oh, I
Wow.
got to reset the whole thing,
Wow.
and I kept trying it, kept trying it. I was like, okay, I officially am calling it off. So that was probably the weirdest and strangest, like, yes, that passed.
Okay.
There's been a couple things like, I think I was 34, 35 at the time. And I had this idea that it's like, I'm only getting older. My body's approaching the point at which it's going to start on the downhill slide, kind of thing. I was like, if I'm ever going to reach this idea of like peak physical form, like this is kind of my last chance. And so I mapped out this whole like workout routine where I was just going to work out like, 2 a days at the gym and all this kind of stuff. And just I was just like, I just want to like touch it once, just be like, can I have like just fully physical perfect shape just once in my life? And my shareholders were like, that's a complete waste of time. No, we're not allowing you to
Oh,
do that. And
wow.
I was so disappointed. And I was just like, but ultimately I've kind of figured out how to balance that a little bit better. And now I feel like I'm healthy without being
Okay.
overly going to the gym 8 times a day.
How many votes do you put up a month or a year, or is that up to whatever life changes are going on or whatever is
Yeah,
going on in your life?
very based on life changes, and it's I try to do one a month.
Okay.
And as I've gotten older, like I'm 46 now, and it's a lot harder to come up with votes now than it used to be.
Okay.
And when I started this, it was about kind of this control of kind of a lot of my kind of extracurricular projects, like, again, was doing a lot of stuff with um like these blog communities and kind of various, I don't know, a lot of just like kind of goofing off online projects.
Okay.
And so I was thinking, I thought it was a way to control those things. And as I've gotten like into this part of my life, it kind of is again a little bit about projects, because now like I don't I don't have a day job. I just kind of like pick up a gig here. I'll work for somebody for a little while over here. And so now like I just did this podcast. I think we talked about it last time we hung
Yeah.
out with Nick, called Hamburger Business Review. And I put it up for a vote, and I was like it was essentially a proposal of like
Right.
10 episodes, right? One season of this show, and then no more unless it gets approved again. So kind of treating the shareholders almost like, like Disney, like I'm pitching a show to them, and I
Okay.
have to like kind of map it out, and then they get to say yes or no of whether I do it. And I have this new kind of concept for a podcast I want to do with my partner Catherine, who's a TV writer, and I'll probably pitch that soon and let the shareholders kind of decide yes or no. And what's nice about that proposal is I can post that proposal, and people can ask questions and even kind of like redefine the proposal a little bit.
Right. Okay.
Like if I post something and I'm like, here's the idea, and you're like, I like everything except for this, I'll be like, okay, I'll change that. I'll go back, edit the proposal. Now what do you think? And then the vote, then maybe you'll change your vote or something like
Okay.
that. So
Yeah.
it ends up being a really dynamic conversation with a group of like pretty wildly varied people, which is really fun.
You, I want to go back to the beginning a little bit. What happens when people buy a stock in Mike, a share in Mike? Where does the money go? Is that sitting in a bank account? What's the economics there?
Yeah, so there's two ways to buy shares. Every year I'll do an auction of shares that
Okay.
I have. Because like I said, there's 100,000, but I still hold most of them. I don't vote
Okay.
my shares, so it's just the shares that are out there that vote.
Okay. How many shares do you have out?
I think right now I want to say there's like, I'd have to check, but I think there's like 20,000 out there.
Okay.
Yeah. And what happened is basically when we first started this project, I was just selling shares on the market, but because I had so many, I could undercut the price of
Right.
everybody. And so everyone was like, this doesn't seem fair. And I was like, fair enough. I'll just do mine I just do it to kind of cover the cost of it, keeping the servers up and
Right.
stuff like that. So I do an auction. If you buy at the auction, that money goes to me and that's mine.
Okay. Okay.
But all the other funds that go back and forth is going to be between you and another shareholder. So yeah, when you make a deposit, I take that money, I stick it in an account, and I don't touch it. And then when
Okay.
you're ready for a withdrawal, I just send it back to you.
Okay.
And it's wildly inefficient.
Okay.
It's not the right way to do it. But one of my, and I'm not okay, so I'll start to say I'm not a lawyer. I don't know how any of this works, but uh if I was a company, then I wouldn't be able to sell shares in a company because I'd have to register those because that's a security,
Right.
whatever. You can't actually own a person. All you're buying, like we talked about, what you're buying is the right to vote on this website. It's much more like a game than it is an actual security. And so, in that sense, you're just buying a limited number of these votes, and people are trading them back and forth between themselves. So I do, if you, let's say you deposit $1,000, I put that in my bank. I do have to claim that as income, so I do pay taxes
Okay.
on it. But then later, like you might withdraw it, or somebody else might withdraw, and then I have to get. So it's not a perfect system. I like to say it's an experiment, and we're still figuring out all the rules.
Okay. And I wanted to talk through that, and I'm glad you brought up it's an experiment and we're going through it. Let's pretend we're sitting at a coffee shop now and we're going through it. How would you make the system more efficient? Like what's Mike shares 2.0 or 3.0? Like and when I was doing some research, I was thinking too, is we see Mr. Beast today, we see the Kardashians, we see these big celebrities. And I so believe that we could have a marketplace where we have all these different celebrities and people could buy shares in them and have this marketplace. Uh, what's the idea of Mike as a publicly traded person?
So like I kicked this project off in 2013. I think it was only, I looked this up once. It was only like 5 or 6 months later that
Okay.
the Bitcoin white paper came out. And
Right.
so it's very like crypto has come to a place where essentially anyone can create their own money, their own
Right.
shares, whatever they want, and they can experiment with these weird new forms of kind of personal economics, you know? What we've seen is it doesn't really work, you know? At scale, it doesn't work.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of examples and ways that people are trying. I think I have a lot of fun. I think it's complicated, but it's like
Okay.
what I've done is keep it pretty small and pretty tight as a form of an experiment to see like
Okay.
not just because I'm not trying to scale it. I'm not trying to create a product that's for everyone. So it's kind of like, what can I do with it? And then once I've done something enough times, I'm like kind of done with it and I want to move on to
Okay.
something else. You know, like
Okay.
I'd really love to make it so that people could short me, you know, like that
Right.
doesn't exist. Like I would love to loan you some shares, figure out all the mechanics for how to do a short and have that be a part of it. Um, I do think like, you know, if you think about like the next version of this for me, it's like right now there's only one share on my market, and it would be interesting if there was two or three. And I don't know what, you know, maybe there's different classes of stock with different voting rights. Maybe
Right.
there's one other person that wants to do this that I really trust that I want to add in there. You know, like I do think there's like room for it to grow again in a small way, but I'm not I'd like other people to look at this, take what works and what doesn't, and then try to go build something at scale. Because I think this thing works best pretty small.
Okay. And you keep on mentioning this idea of like you copied some traits of the stock market. You want some people to take that idea, copy a little bit of it, and take it. I'm reading a very interesting essay for Paul Graham, and it's how to be or how to be successful. I forgot the exact title, but he speaks about this idea of to be successful, you're allowed to copy work from a different industry and bring it to your industry and iterate on it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are very against copying and, oh no, you're doing something wrong. But no, your essence of starting something great is copying something from a different industry, bringing fresh set new of eyes and doing it in a better way.
There's nothing I love more than taking a framework, a really well-established framework, and kind of misapplying it or breaking it and applying
Yes.
it to something else. So what I've done is essentially take everything that I understand, and again, uneducated, or I guess you could say self-educated about business, and just apply it to my personal life. I love using enterprise products for my personal life.
Mhm.
And it doesn't always work, but I think where it doesn't work, where those little gaps are, highlights a really interesting difference between an individual person and a company.
Okay. This was a crazy idea you did, being a publicly traded person. Let's say I would let's say you didn't do that. What's another crazy idea that's itching your mind that like, I want to try this. I want to do this project.
This actually passed. I put this up for a vote and it passed, and I haven't done it yet. But do you know about onion futures?
No.
Okay, so you're not allowed to trade onion futures in the United States. There's a really
Okay.
amazing Planet Money podcast episode about this. But basically, what happened is somebody cornered the market on onion futures in Chicago, and it caused untold, you know, hell for the onion farmers. And the
Okay.
onion farmers raised a big fuss, and you know, the government, Congress, and all of its mighty wisdom to solve the problem said, okay, no more trading onion futures. They didn't solve the problem of cornering a market and sabotaging a whole industry. They just removed the one part. And I was like, that's not a solution. You can't just say like it's like if I went up and slapped you in the face and then you complained about it and then someone made a law that said I'm not allowed to slap you in the
In the
face.
face. But everyone could slap me in the face.
Other people could slap each other. You're like, you're not solving the issue here, right? And so it's like it was an overly specific solve. So if you look up that law about the onion futures, which I did, it actually has the penalty if you violate that law is $5,000. It says
No,
it in the
okay.
law. So what I want to do is I want to create a market for onion futures, have my friends trade futures contracts, and then I want to call, I guess it would be the CFTC, and turn myself in and just be like, "Hey, I traded onion futures. Now I'm turning myself in. Now what?" You know. So that's the kind of, yeah. Again,
Okay.
it's like I want to, like, they created this whole system. They said they solved it, and I kind of want to just be like, "No, you
You
didn't.
didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, watch
Wow.
this." So yeah, we'll see. If I end up in jail, that's why.
I love this. I'm sure throughout this experiment, you've met a lot of cool people because of the cool thing you've done. Uh, what doors have opened for you because of this experiment you've been running?
That's it. It's definitely the main kind of superpower of this project has been the community. Like this thing is kind of like a flag that waves around, and other people see it and are like, oh, that's weird. I want to go talk to that person.
Okay,
And, if somebody could be wildly different from me, but if they're interested in this kind of crazy idea, I'm probably going to get along with them.
right.
Like there's something about this idea that is a little bit dumb and a little bit interesting, and you combine those together and it's like, oh, like that's kind of maybe where fun is where like dumb and
Yeah.
interesting combine. It's like so yeah, I mean, the reason that I live in Los Angeles is I was I was looking for a job, and I put out a bounty for a new job. I said, whoever finds me a new job, I'll give them 500 shares. And one of my shareholders who lives in LA was like, have you thought about this job? And I was like, oh, I didn't specify, but I'm looking in my, in Portland where I live. I'm not looking in LA. And they're like, well, maybe you should. And so I applied, I got the job, and I moved to Los Angeles. So that's
Wow.
like a direct impact of,
Wow.
having shareholders and that kind of thing. And then my new boss at the time, he bought like $500 worth of shares. So yeah, so that's, like, and then he's still a shareholder, kind of thing.
Oh,
So it's the kind of a, I don't know. I mean, we have like a Slack channel and a newsletter. I do these like almost daily podcasts that are super short. Like there's just a lot of like small little
right.
interactions.
Yeah.
If I removed this from my life, it would be, I mean, I think I would feel a little bit naked and weird without it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really come to define me in such a
Yeah.
way. And I look forward to those interactions with my
Right.
shareholders.
Because you feel you have like this community where you could reach out to if there's anything, oh, hey, like job or I'm working on this project, and someone would pitch in and be like, hey, I have this idea. How about you try it? And you have this community that's always there to help, and you're growing that.
Totally. Like
Yeah.
on the Hamburger Business Review
Yeah.
podcast, I had one of my other shareholders come and be a guest on it once. We did a episode about AI in McDonald's, and somebody generated a bunch of like, weird AI generated McDonald's images for
Oh,
us.
wow.
Like it's nice to kind of have it's an audience, but it's also more than an audience. And I think people use the word community when I think they still think audience in a lot of ways. Like the fact that these people are coming together. We have a weekly poker game where we just like get on a Zoom and play poker, kind of thing. Like it's
Wow.
just, yeah, it's a regular group of people that kind of gets together and talks about this stuff.
I love the sense of community, especially when there's really interactions happening. Looking back at it, do you think you made the right choice? And I think the answer is yes. I'm
Yes,
assuming.
it's I think that like obviously when you look back, you're like, there's plenty of things that I would change or move
Right.
around or do in a different order. Or there was a time when I started quote unquote, a real company. I was a co-founder of a tech startup, and I really had to like pull back from doing this project.
Okay.
And even now, I have a couple of projects going on that are with people that are pretty big projects, but like aren't announced yet. And because it involves other people, I can't even announce it really to my shareholders. And so like that balance, I think, is something that if I went back, I think I would either figure out some way where like maybe there's a board of directors that I can share things with,
Right.
or just be like, I'm not doing a project unless I'm allowed to be completely transparent with this group. And if you don't like that, I'm not your guy, kind of
Wow.
thing. So like
Okay.
one of those two, because it's like I'm always in this kind of like a little bit gray area where I'm like, oh, what can I say? I feel like I owe it to them to tell them something because they bought shares. At the same time, it's not public information yet, so I can't really share it.
You should start having, and that's an idea, have kind of like an SEC rule book. Start your mic rule book and start putting these rules out
Mm-hmm.
and just abide by them for the rest
I
of the
like that.
project.
I like that. And then it's like if I want to change them, changes to the rules could go for a vote, kind of thing.
Yeah,
You could,
yeah,
yeah, it could be ratified by the
right.
shareholders.
It's
Yeah.
like a mic constitution of like
Yeah. Yep.
book.
That's a good idea. I like that. I have just started playing with this idea of votes that never expire.
Okay.
So like I have like what does Mike think about cryptocurrency? And there's like I think there's 7 different options. And at any time you can go in and vote and change it, and it's always on
Okay.
basically.
Changes.
And
Okay.
yeah, and so we're using like kind of a weird system. So I have to remember to go back and check it because sometimes my opinion about something will change and I won't even realize it. But yeah, so I have to go and check and be like, what's my opinion on that? But that's kind of related. I like the idea
Right.
of using the votes to kind of self-regulate the organization
Right.
and sort of set the
Interesting.
terms. It's really interesting.
Did this project help Mike achieve wealth? Would it in the future make Mike a millionaire, a billionaire? Is there a path you'd see for that project to get you there?
So
If you're not a
maybe,
millionaire already.
yeah, I'm not right now. I think there's a path, but it's not like a repeatable good path,
Okay.
right? Like in 2014, I think it was, there was a Wired article that came out
Right.
about this project, and it was just online. It wasn't in the magazine or anything, but that story got optioned, and they were going to make a movie out of it, and it never happened. But I was like, oh, if this happens, like that's a huge level
Yep.
difference in this
Yep.
project kind of thing. And and there was a direct, like I would have made money on it, but then also just the notoriety of it would
Right.
have been raised. And now I'm working on a book proposal and trying to do a book deal about kind of telling this whole story as well. And I think having something like that, I think, is on the path of like I think where the money could come from.
Right.
I also am still kind of working out like with these different projects. How does each individual project start being a little bit more money making? Because I don't want to go back to like a day job that is completely separate from this life.
Right.
I
Okay.
want those things to be pretty well integrated. And so that's kind of the next step is like I did get hired to do a couple, projects with people based on this work, but it hasn't become like my full-time all the time
Right.
gig.
Okay. That makes sense. I want to take a step back from all of this. I've noticed you're an investor in Substack, uh, maybe Gumroad, and another startup. How did you make these investments? What was your decision there? How did all that come into play?
I am a huge fan, as you could probably imagine, of like
Yeah.
fractional ownership of,
Right.
basically everything. Like I think I'm on every crowd investment platform, a huge Kickstarter fan. Like I went through Kickstarter and you know how they have like the different color codes for like all
Right.
the different sections. I was like, oh, my pie chart isn't complete. So I had to find like a dance project to support just so I could invest in all of them.
Wow. Okay.
Um, anytime one of these new platforms, whether it's investing in like wine or art or anything like that comes out, I'm always like, I jump on
Okay.
it and I want to do it. So all of the kind of like traditionally kind of more startup investing that I've done has been through either Republic or what's the other big one that I'm blanking on?
Um,
WeFunder.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Refunding.
And so it's been those kind of investments.
Okay.
So
Okay.
what's I did it as kind of like half joking, it because usually real
Yeah.
investors will like put those companies on there. And the problem with putting on there, even as just a crowd-funded investment, like one of them is only like $100
Okay.
investment, is that like other people don't know that it's via Republic or
Right.
whatever. And so I get so much spam now on LinkedIn from people who think I'm some kind of
That-
real investor. So it's and I'm like, well, that's my fault, I put that up there. But
do you see
like
do you go through these messages and look for some cool projects out of them, or do you just like skip by them?
I read them all,
Okay.
for better or for worse. Most of them are pretty easy to ignore,
Okay.
but yeah, there's been a couple times where like somebody will reach out offering some kind of like crazy weird service, like I'll do your whatever
Okay.
videos for your blog, whatever. And I'm always like, interesting. I'm not interested,
Okay.
but I've never done it.
Okay.
But all of them are also like I've only invested in companies that I'm either excited about or actually use.
Right.
Like right now, the KMICM process uses Gumroad. I'm a big Substack user. Like I like that form of fundraising,
Okay.
and I don't think that it's necessarily like that, Republic or we fund. I don't think that's a path as an investor to make like a lot of money,
Right.
but I do think it's a really fun way to just have like a little piece of ownership and kind of like be a part of some of the products and the things that you're using, which I think is really fun.
No, I love that. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh, interesting. I never knew he did invest in these. Like, and what was the dynamic? But it's a nice catch over it. Like, it's a nice catch play to do, like through these platforms. Uh, my last question today is, let's say you have all the money in the world. Speaking about investments, you had an ultimate fund. What's one world problem or one life mission you would do for the rest of your life?
Wow. I think it's not the most noble, but I think the thing that would get me up every morning and keep going is just things under a broad realm of creative.
Okay.
And that's it's almost too broad maybe, but I think like I said, my partner, she's a screenwriter, and like that whole world is fascinating. But I also love the incredibly independent form of it, and like looking at things like Kickstarter and just like indie cultural production. I think
Okay.
is where if I was, if I had no worries and could just keep going, I'd probably be like, financing a bunch of zines and indie music and things that probably don't matter to large groups. I love things that don't scale,
Right.
like
Okay.
that's
Okay.
for me, that's where it gets really exciting.
No, I love that. Mike, it was a great episode, to be honest. I really learned stuff I haven't learned before. Uh, what I did, I didn't go deep into research and reading a lot of articles because I wanted to hear more from you, the person speaking. But I've learned a lot. I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot. If you ever decide that you want to add another publicly traded person to your platform, I'll be interested in being another publicly traded person. Uh, Good luck on any journey you take in, on any project you do. And we have to call Nick so he could arrange another cocktail party down in LA.
Absolutely, yeah, this is all Nick's fault is one way to
Yep.
there's one way to
Yep.
say it.
Exactly.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
No, it's really fun to get to dive in
Yeah.
on this stuff with you, and it's like the way your mind works and the areas that you sort of like honed in on are just like they're a little bit different and well thought out in a way that was like really fun to kind of like spend some time in
Yeah.
that. So yeah, thanks.
Where could people follow more of what you're doing, or just
I've
keep in touch?
always
Or
Yeah, the easiest thing is just KMikeyM. And so it's
okay,
kmikeym.com. That's the handle that I use for Twitter and Instagram and everything else as well. So it's an easy Google search. If you search publicly traded person, I think I think I'm the only
yeah.
one. So yeah, that's another easy one.
No, thank you for being on the pod. I really appreciate it, Mike.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.